So, welcome to week 2 in our Straight Talk series. I want to begin by taking a little bit of a poll, and so you're going to ask by way of show of hands. First I thought that probably money would be one of the hardest things to talk about, and then I thought, probably sex is. So, how many of you think, by show of hands, that money would be harder to talk about than sex? So, if you say money would be, raise your hand. How many of you think sex is way harder to talk about? All right, so it's the way it was in the first gathering. Some of you are just like, I'm not going to vote. You can't make me, you can't force me, there's no way I'm gonna. And some of us are like, I don't want to be wrong. What if there's a wrong answer? So I'm not going to raise my hand just in case I'm wrong. Of course, there isn't a wrong answer. But today, I'm going to talk about sex. How many of you today remember having the sex talk with mom and dad? Kind of, maybe, no. Some of you don't want to go back. You don't want to remember that time, right? I have to be honest. I was thinking about my first talk with my oldest son, and it was fairly recent. And I'm like, hey, we're dudes, right? You gotta do it somewhere where you're not looking across the table at him and look him in the eyes. So like, let's make this as safe as possible. So we got in the car and we went for a drive. And so, the conversation comes out, you ask a few questions. I'm like, you good? Yeah, I'm good, Dad. All right, we're good. And then you kind of move on. Luckily for me, and this has just become more of a revelation for us, is that it's not going to be just a one-time conversation. And if you're a parent here today, it can't be just a one-time conversation. It's something you talk about, and then it's something. My daughters just told us, Mom and Dad, you got to keep talking about it with my older daughters. And so we had a great conversation around the dinner table last night, and since I knew I was talking on this subject, I invited them in, my older kids, to be a part of this conversation and talk to us, give us some feedback. What have we done well? And what we found out is we got to do a much better job at continuing the conversation with them. And so I appreciate that from our kids. And you may not have this opportunity, but I do. We have 7 kids, and so we figure by the time Jubilee comes around, right, we're going to get it right. We'll be much better at that point by the time she comes around. But until then, I guess the rest of the kids just get to tolerate us and say, all right, Mom and Dad, you're doing better. And that's the main thing. As long as we approach this, right, with this mindset that it's something we're growing in, I think if we approach it that way, it can be such a healthy thing. Such a healthy thing. So my goal this morning is not to make anyone feel uncomfortable. Yeah, right. Alicia laughs. Though that may happen, and I do promise to keep it PG. And so I know some of you are like, okay, what am I going to do with my kids right about now? Should I take them out? Should I cover their ears? Should I be concerned about my kids? I don't think you should. Now, I do realize that some things that I say today, that they may hit some of us in a sensitive spot or a sensitive area of our lives. For some of us, it may hit us wrong. It may rub us a little bit wrong. Some of what I say you may push against inside because it's the first time you've heard it and you've not heard anything like this possibly. Or maybe you're going to push against it because you're going to be challenged maybe to rethink some things regarding sex and how you communicate, how you talk about it, and what you do with it. And maybe for some of us, we're going to have to unlearn some things that have been a part of our life for a very long time. Some of us might experience a shift in perspective, and so I think if you feel a little bit uncomfortable, it's okay. I think that's a necessary part of the conversation. So if you did have to make a shift, I think that would be amazing. If you're willing to make a shift, I think that would be amazing. If you had a place in your life where maybe it brings a trajectory change in your life, I think that would be amazing. I'd be okay with that. Hopefully for the betterment. But here's what I know to be true, and I think if you looked at it and realized it, I think you would realize it to be true as well. Would you put up that next slide? Only you can decide what kind of person you want to be. Only you and I get to decide what kind of person I want to be. Nobody gets to decide that for me. Now, I understand there's lots of influences and things that are said in our culture and people in our lives that want to influence us to behave a particular way and think a particular way. But at the end of the day, remove all of those things and you and I get to decide what kind of people we want to be. You get to decide that. Somebody else doesn't decide that for you. You get to decide that. So if at the end of this talk you want to be the same person as when you walked in, guess what? You get to be the same person as when you walked in. But if you want to walk out a different person, please walk out a different person. Want to make a shift in your thinking and your behavior? Guess what? You get to make the shift. You get to make the decision there. Someone else doesn't make that decision for you. And if you don't like what I have to say, you get to decide what you do with not liking with what I have to say. Now, I realized this morning that I'm speaking to a diverse audience. And we have some younger people in here. We have some teenagers in here. We have some college age in here. We have some single people in here. Hopefully, any single people in here. Some enthusiasm there, Michael. There with that. And we know that there are some married folks in here, some folks that have been married a whole long time. I want to ask, how many of you have been married longer than 20 years? Longer than 30 years? Longer than 40 years? Longer than 50 years? First of all, let's say we want to celebrate marriage and celebrate those of you that have stuck it out. Amen. Good job. Just had someone after the first gathering share a little bit of advice with me, and they've been married 54 years, and they said his mom told him that she learned that she probably should have married for money early on instead of later on. No, I'm just teasing. Thought that was kind of a funny joke anyways. There you have it. Thank you for staying married. So here's the approach that I want to take this morning. Here's the approach. Now, I'm 43 years old. Some of you, man, you're old, and some of you are like, man, you're just a young guy. But at this point in my life, knowing what I know now, which is not a lot, but here's what I would say. I'm going to take the approach of what I would say to a teenager, to a single person, and to a married person. So, what would I say? That's the approach I want to take. So, first I want to speak to the teenagers. What would I say, based on what I know now, to all the teenagers in here today? And to those of us who are parents and have kids and who are having conversations about these things at home. First thing I would say is this: sex is for married people. If you are a parent here today, I would encourage you, start early. Now, obviously, there's wisdom in this. There's age appropriateness in this, right? But begin talking about those things early on. Talk about marriage and the importance of marriage and what a good marriage looks like. Model it to your kids. But begin talking to them early on about it. So, for example, just recently with our youngest, she was talking about kissing another boy or something like that. And my wife said, that's for marriage. And so you start early on, just establishing this foundation, talking about marriage in this context, creating a culture in your home that those things are saved for marriage. And so you begin that early on. So you begin to talk to them about that and be a part of shaping the conversation. So have lots of conversations around the table. And this is one of the takeaways for my wife and I with our older daughters is they said you need to talk about it more. It needs to become less awkward. And just something where you can, feel free to have an open and honest conversation around the dinner table. And so figure out ways to introduce that. And for some of you, that means having dinner together. There's a great idea. Sit your family down together and have a dinner together and actually talk about things and bring some of these things out in conversation. So that would be a great thing to do. So have lots of conversations around the dinner table and work to build a culture, again, in your home where you can talk openly and honestly about these things. I think we all realize that if we learn to talk about it more openly and honestly, the less awkward it becomes. Even in the church, there's this sense of it's not something you talk about, right? And so we need to find ways to talk about it more in healthy contexts and healthy ways. This week I read an article on 3 lies that mainstream media is telling our kids. Basically, the premise of the article is that kids aren't learning from mom and dad. Why? Because mom and dad aren't having the conversations. And they're not learning from their health teacher or their science teacher because they don't want to learn from their health teacher, their science teacher. And I don't even know if they still do that anymore. I guess they probably do in some sense. But, it's awkward enough, and so they shut that out as well. Outside of listening to the shock of their bolder, more likely exaggerated peers when they brag or talk about their, adventures or whatever, they are turning to the screen. They're turning to the screen. And it's less awkward than talking to a parent and more exciting than talking to the health teacher. True that. Here's the thing, while we as parents may not be the biggest voice, it's important that we have a voice. It's important that you as a parent have a voice. As a grandparent, there's grandparents in today, that you have a voice in your grandchild's life, that you have a voice in your kid's life. It's important that you have a voice. We may not be the biggest voice, we may not be the loudest voice, but we need to be a voice in their life. We need to be intentional to create this atmosphere in our homes where we have a voice. Here's the thing, don't leave it to Pastor Skyler. Some of you are like, man, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to drop my kid off at youth and leave it to the youth pastor for them, for him to talk about how my kids should know how to handle the subject of sex. Yeah. Well, I'm helping with the process, but don't leave it up to me. Right? These are conversations you need to have at home that you need to have a voice in as well. So in this article, line number 2 is this. Line number 2 was that sex has no context. And so you think about the big screen, and often what you see portrayed there is that really there isn't much of a context. Think about it. How often is it portrayed that way on the screen? That there's some, epic event, and this thing just happens, and there's sparks, and there's chemistry, and it's amazing. And that's it. And they kind of go their own ways and live their lives, and there's no consequences and whatever else. And think about it. It's portrayed as if it's somehow removed often from real life. No one has bad breath. Come on, no one is tired. No one just had a bad day at work and is not in the mood. See, sex outside of context is just not real life where there are real demands, where it involves real people with real emotions and emotions that are very complex, where there are schedules and expectations and imperfect bodies. Often what do we see? We see perfect bodies, and then in real life, right, there's imperfect bodies. There are schedules, again, there are alarm clocks, there are psychological dysfunction that we all bring into relationships, and there are distractions. And if you have kids, you know what it's like to have the kids knocking on the door. You're like, go away. But whatever they have to say, just can't wait, right? It's the most important thing. So speaking of context, you know, I want to say this. I don't know that it worked in the first gathering, but I was thinking, at least in my mind, Mom, Dad, you're going to want me to preach this again next month, right? What I'm about to say. But here's the thing, and it's really anticlimactic, I realize that, but you're like, take it back. But here it is. Context is everything. Media may say context has nothing to do with it, but in real life, context is everything. Think about the context of a teenager's life. They're not ready for the perils, for the psychological effect, for the emotional effect of what comes if you venture down that road and begin to step out and take that lane. You're not ready for sex. And some of you don't want to hear that, but I'm going to tell you anyways, you're not ready. You're not ready for what that will bring in your life. You're not mature enough to handle it. You're not ready for the emotional reality that it will bring with it. You're not ready for the long-term commitment of marriage, and really intimacy is expressed best in a long-term relationship. You're not ready to support a family. You're not ready to lay down your life for your spouse. You're not mature enough to handle what sex brings, to really love like 1 Corinthians 13 lays out. I think if you can get a hold of 1 Corinthians 13 and really be someone who's patient and kind and who's mature, because at the end of that chapter, Paul says, you got to leave thinking like a child. You thought like a child, you reasoned like a child, but eventually you got to leave childish ways away. And so most of the time, I'd say teenagers, they're not ready. They're not in a place where they can handle what that will bring into their life. So, why not just focus on school? Why not just focus on having lots of friends and being friends with lots of people and being concerned about being the best person that you can possibly be and being concerned about being a person of character, about being somebody that somebody else someday wants to marry and share a relationship with. So you can be better prepared to handle all that comes later with relationship. And I think if you would be honest, even those of us that have been married for a long time, it's not easy then. And sometimes we bring all these other things into the relationship, and it's totally hard. It's completely impossible to remove all of them, but come on, we want a chance. And sometimes we head down roads that really don't give us much of a chance. So when it comes to your sexuality, God made you with urges and desires, and that's from God. And that's a natural part of being a person, of being a human being. But there's a right place and there's a right context to express those things. We get it. Chemically, you're changing. Come on. As an adolescent, you're changing, and chemically things are changing in your brain and in your body. But you need to hear this. The patterns and the rhythms you develop today will carry over into your adult life. So why not focus and why not be intentional now to develop healthy patterns of thought regarding sex and thinking and attitudes that are healthy now, so that later on you can carry less baggage into that relationship with you. What if you could learn to have self-control now? Some of us think, well, I get married and I won't have any problems with self-control at that point. Not true. If you can learn to have self-control now and learn to manage those urges and those feelings in ways that are healthy, you'll be better prepared later on. Don't think about it as a sacrifice. Think about it as an investment in you, in your future, in the intimacy and the kind of life that you can enjoy someday with another person. Think about this. I think it'd be great to find somebody older that you can talk to. And hopefully it's mom and dad. But if it's not mom and dad, who is that in your life? If you don't have somebody like that, I would encourage you to be praying and thinking about who's somebody that is older than me, that's not a peer, that I can talk to about some of these things, about the changes in my body, about the changes in my mind, about the urges and the desires in those things. Somebody that can come alongside and be patient and help me process and work through those things. So I think it's so important to learn to respect yourself and learn to respect others. Do it now. Don't wait until you're older. We take care of what we value. So if you value yourself and you value others and you care about your future, think about investing during this time in your life. See, all around us we're told, satisfy yourself, gratify yourself. As long as it feels good to you, do it. You deserve it. You worked hard for it. You have the urges. Give into it. Make yourself feel better. Do it because it feels good. See, making an investment now will pay off later. So let's be honest, though. No one in Hollywood would ever make a movie about what I'm talking about. There's no story there. There's no drama there. Well, there's less drama. Okay, we'll say that. There's less drama there. So what does the Bible say? 1 Corinthians 6:18 says, flee sexual immorality. 1 Corinthians 6:20 says that you and I were bought at a price, therefore honor God with your body. 2 Timothy 2:22 says, now flee from youthful lusts and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and patience with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. So what if we set aside this time in our lives really to do it a different way? What else would I say to you? I would also say this, if you have crossed that line, you've not ruined your future. See, again, sometimes this whole idea of sex is taboo in the church, and we're so good at throwing on guilt and throwing on shame that we tell people that unless you keep yourself a certain way until marriage, then you've lost that opportunity. It won't be special. You won't have any intimacy in the relationship. And so we've been good at that in the church of making youth feel guilty and shameful and like nobody would want me. That's a lie. It's not the truth. You've not been ruined. You've not lost your chance at love and intimacy. That's a lie. So don't listen to the lie. You know, I've heard of people, again, let's go back to the idea of baggage. And again, we all come into a relationship with baggage. I just recently read an article of a young gal who kept herself until her marriage. But she grew up in the church and she had this idea of sex that it was dirty and shameful. And it took her 3 to 5 years to finally come to a point where she could have any kind of intimacy with her husband because she couldn't do it. There was so much shame attached to it and she never did the act. Think about that. Right? We all have stuff. I watched a video, and my wife remembered the book that it came from, but a youth pastor one time, or a youth person, gave an illustration, and he talked about a water bottle. He had 2 water bottles. I only had one, so it would work. But he took it off, and he took a drink, and then he passed it around to a number of people that were going to be a part of the illustration, and they all took a drink. And then he took a water bottle never been drank out of, and he said, which would you rather drink out of? The dirty one or the clean one? And then the guy who was sharing this said it hit me as I heard that. It just didn't sit right. And then it said it hit him. What about all those people in the crowd, all those youth that day that they felt like they're the dirty water? Right? We like to motivate out of shame a lot of times and shame people into changing their behavior, and then we find out shame really isn't a great motivator. So then he began to think about water, and I think it was probably the Holy Spirit talking to him, and as he was listening to this, it hit him. Even the water was contaminated. The water that you and I drink out of water bottles, it's been purified. And even in the water that we drink, it still has contaminants. And so then it hit him. We're all contaminated. We've all sinned. We all fall short. We're all impure in different ways. And maybe you've not done the outward act, but inside you know what goes on in your mind and you know what goes on in your heart. And so you need to hear that today. Rick, if you want to put up that next slide. None of us are pure. But there's good news attached on the other side of that. But we are being purified. If you're in relationship with God and you abide in Him, guess what? You're being made pure. God's at work in you, and He's working you, and He's crafting you, and He's causing things alive to come alive in you, and He's making you new, and He's changing you, and He's transforming you. We're all impure, but the good news is that we're all being made pure if you're in Christ. So we don't need to shame anybody today. I don't want you to feel horrible about yourself. I don't want to feel horrible, but know that. I thought that was a very good point, that we're all impure. But we don't have to stay that way. So, You're not ruined. All right. So if you're single here today, or will be single someday, what would I say to you? 2 things. First thing is this: sex is more than just physical. Now, don't fall for that line, because there's this idea in culture, and I'm not against culture, but it's a story that's being told and retold, and the more you hear it, the easier it is to get wrapped up in it and to believe it, and that's this, that it's just physical. It doesn't affect you emotionally. It doesn't affect you psychologically. You can do whatever you want to your body and not have it impact you or affect you. And here's the thing we're going to read, and we're going to see from 1 Corinthians 6 that we cannot separate who we are from what we do. We are body, soul, and spirit. So open your Bibles, and we're going to read a couple of verses there in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. And what's so interesting is that there was a culture that believed a lot of what our culture believes today. And this idea out there that it's just physical. Well, that's a story that's been told for a long time. It was being told in Corinth. Starting in verse 12 of 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Paul says, and he writes to the church there, and he says, all things are lawful for me. You have freedom to do certain things, but it doesn't mean you should do it. It's basically what he's saying. But all things are not helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. Food's for the stomach and stomach for foods, but God will destroy both of them, both it and them. Now the body is not for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. And God both raised up the Lord and will also raise us up by his power. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take the member of Christ and make them members of a harlot? Certainly not. Or do you not know that he who is joined to a harlot is one with her? For the two, he says, shall become flesh. One flesh, goes back to Genesis. But he who is joined to the Lord is one spirit with him. So flee sexual immorality. Every sin that a man commits outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own, for you were bought at a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. It's his. You and I belong to him. Right? We've been bought at a great price. Now, here's the thing. There was this belief in culture then that you could do whatever you wanted to your body and there was no effects to the rest of your person. The thought is like food. If you're hungry, what do? You eat. So if you have sexual urges and you have sexual desires, what do? You act on it. There's no consequences. And Paul says, hey, let's slow this train down. And you need to know there are consequences. And you need to know that it's more than just physical. There is a reality here that runs much deeper than what the culture is saying. There's a certain reality here that we need to be aware of. So think about it. If sex was just physical, why does sexual abuse mess kids up? And maybe you're here today and you're an adult and you're still dealing with sexual things that happened to you when you were a kid. It's just physical. Why do we carry the mental and the emotional reality of that into our adulthood if it's just physical? Why is sexual assault so devastating? And you can put a more intense word in there. I'm not gonna, but you can. You know what I'm talking about. Why is that so devastating? Why do people have a hard time moving on? It goes with them. Why? Because it's not just physical. It's not the same as just being beat up. If it's just physical, you could beat a person up and assault them and have them feel the same way and be able to come out of it in the same way. Yeah, I understand there are scars on both sides, but I think there's something deeper that goes on. Why is it that some of the deepest sexual issues in men can be connected to that of an absent father? It's not physical. Why is it that when regrets are talked about, that most people, the most talked about regret is that of a sexual nature? I heard a pastor just recently told a story of, it's like he's in the grocery store and he's kind of a well-known pastor of a bigger church, a mega church, and he's like, man, I go into Safeway, and people all the time, they just want to confess things to me, and there's like, there are things they're confessing to me that no man should be confessing to any man, right? And it's like, and most of the time, it's about sexual sin. And sometimes they've not even told their spouse, or they're trying to hide it from their spouse, or hide it from their parents, and it's like, I got to get this off my chest. I just have to confess this to someone, and you're here, Pastor, so I'm going to confess it to you. I've never told anyone this before, what I'm about to tell you, so, just keep it between us, but, If it's just physical, why does pornography rewrite pathways in the brain and affect sexual intimacy? Pornography rewrites the neural pathways in our mind, and it causes us to think different and to behave different, and it affects intimacy. See, our culture says, no, it helps intimacy, but scientifically and psychologically, it's proven it doesn't help intimacy. It takes away intimacy. In many cases, it makes relationships hard. But it's just physical. If sex was just physical, it wouldn't have such consequence on our emotional, spiritual, psychological, and relational lives. Again, popular culture won't tell you this. It's too boring. It won't sell. It'll never make the tabloids. There's no entertainment value there. It's not what you will hear, but it's the truth. So here's what I would encourage you to do. I would encourage you, decide ahead of time what honoring God with your body looks like. Same as last week, we talked about budgets. If you know what you're saying yes to, then saying no to other things becomes a whole lot easier. The same is true when it comes to our sexuality. If you know ahead of time what you're saying no to, then it begins, right? Your friends are going a certain way, going a certain direction, but you're not, you've already said no to that, or you've already said yes to this, then you can say no to that. It just becomes easier in that sense. So decide ahead of time what honoring God with your body is going to look like. Genesis 2:18 says, "Then the Lord God said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him." This verse speaks first not to the need to procreate. It first speaks to the need that you and I have for relationship. It's not good that you and I be alone. You and I were meant to live life with others, to share life with another person. If you choose not to, that's okay too. But in the sense, we're not supposed to live life alone, because we were created in the image of God to share in relationship, to share intimate moments with another person. So at the core of our being is the need to know and to be known, to be intimate, to connect, to share life. So God created us for relationship, to know and to be known. Sex then is the greatest expression of that. It's a celebration of intimacy. And when our thinking gets off and when our behavior gets off with that, what takes the biggest hit is our ability to be intimate at the level that God says that we can be intimate. Because God created us for relationship. It's spiritual, it's physical, it's spiritual, it's emotional, it's psychological, it's not just physical. This is why sex is so complicated, because it's not just physical. Right? And anybody that's been married for any extent of time, you know that. Secondly, what I would say to you is this: be a student of relational development. In other words, learn how to build relationships with other people. Learn how to ask good questions. Learn how to be vulnerable. Learn the value of humility. Learn the value of serving others. Learn the value of that. Be a student of relationship development. See, Chemistry is good, but knowing how to work at a relationship is better. And often, what does our culture tell us? Chemistry is where it's at. As long as you have chemistry with another person, then you've met the right person. But then what happens when you met the right person, you have great chemistry, and that chemistry is challenged and it takes a hit, and all of a sudden you don't have such great chemistry. Oh, I guess I didn't meet the right person. So then what do we have to do? We got to start all over again. We got to go find the right person. And we find the right person because there's great chemistry. And physically, man, we're attracted and we like this and there's lots of adrenaline and this is good. And then you go down that path again and you find out. You keep doing that over and over again. You're like, man, why does it ever seem to work out for me? Why am I always on the bummer end of this relationship thing? Then you find out, I have no idea how to have a relationship with another person. I can have chemistry with people, but there's got to be something that goes deeper than just chemistry. So when the physical things begin to take a hit, what are you going to stand on? So a lot of people never figure this out. They never learn how to be patient and kind and the importance of kindness and patience in a relationship. A lot of people never open the door of their hearts to 1 Corinthians 13. See, often couples don't know how or what to do when the euphoria of meeting the right person begins to be challenged by life, feelings, and circumstances. Now what do? The euphoria is gone. I guess we don't have the chemistry. I thought we were great together. And so then we go looking for someone that we're great with again. And then the cycle starts all over again. If we don't learn to change the pattern and develop an ability to connect and actually have a relationship, know how to have a relationship. Some of you might get this. I think there was more in the first gathering crowd, but it reminded me of that song by the Righteous Brothers, when you've lost that loving feeling. Now it's gone, gone, gone. Right? Some of you are starting to feel it. Got a little dance going on there. So when you've lost that loving feeling, what kind of foundation do you have? All right. So we're just about done. Lastly, I'm going to say a couple things to all the married people in here. All right? As if you need me to say something to you, I'm going to. First thing is this. You got this. Whether you've been married a year, 5 years, 10 years, 12 years, 20 years, 50, you had somebody in the first gathering 54 years, you got this. But here's the thing, you got this, but you have to keep working at your relationship. So keep working to keep the love among you alive. You got to flame that flame, you got to cultivate that romance in your relationship. You got to work at it. It doesn't come natural, and it's not always easy. And for some of you, especially if you find yourself being a very scheduled person, that means you got to write it on your calendar. Put it in your schedule, right? Put it on your calendar and make sure it's there. And then hold each other to it, so schedule it if you have to. Honor your commitment, your devotion to your spouse by continuing to lay down your life for one another. So you got to keep working at it. If you don't work at it, guess what? It's going to die. So know this, those following you, they're watching you. All of us have people in our lives, they're watching our marriage. They're watching how we relate to one another. They're watching whether there's love there, whether there's chemistry, is it deeper than chemistry? They're watching all of that. They're watching how we relate to another, and they're watching, do we really love each other? Do we just kind of tolerate each other? Is there this flame of romance? Is it alive? Know this, those that are watching you, they want you to succeed. Your kids want you to succeed. Your parents want you to succeed. We want you to succeed. There are people that are cheering you on. They want you to lead the way. They want you to show them what true love and intimacy looks like. That this is what it can look like. You can have this in your marriage, in your relationship. That this is what it's like for two people to share something special with one another. But you got to fight for it. Second thing is this. It's never too late to start talking about sex. Now, you may be married for 30 years or more and you're here today and sex is off limits. You don't talk about it. You don't communicate. You don't talk about it. It's kind of like money and kind of like politics. It's something you don't talk about. So we just don't talk about that in our relationship. And here's the thing. The wife is wounded. The husband is frustrated. But we don't talk about it. No, we don't do that in our relationship. Let me ask you this. How long can that go on in a marriage before there are devastating consequences? The husband needs to hear if you've been wounded. The wife needs to hear if you're frustrated. Or flip it. It's never too late to begin the conversation, to begin the dialogue. See, men need to hear when they are insensitive to the marriage relationship or the marriage atmosphere and seem to be only concerned about the physical act. And when it becomes like that for you, for the wife, you need to let your husband know. You need to talk about it. And men ultimately need to learn to be okay when there are other things going on in the marriage that impact the couple's sex life. Some of you are not going to like this, but I heard it and I thought, that's good. It's for guys and girls. It's important to have it in your relationship, but you don't need it. It's not like food and water that if you don't have it, you're going to die. Women need not to live in fear of not being able to meet their spouse's sexual needs. And if you're here today and you live in fear of that, you need to be able to communicate that. Have open, honest dialogue with your spouse to be able to talk about those things. And what leads to that and the insecurities that go into that. It's never too late to begin the conversation. So how do you live a life that stands out? Above all, you guard your heart. Be more concerned about the condition of your heart above all. Pastor Skyler, if you want to come.